Hey, gang, we had one straggler, so I wanted to share that on Halloween, and I thought I'd follow it up with just a bunch of random, really creepy things kids have said to parents. Just kind of a mishmash of something a little creepy on Halloween. Everyone, be safe out there. Happy Halloween. He only showed up on Halloween, submitted by Keffer. I guess this one won't be scary to everyone, but it was for me and my friends. All of this could just be circumstance or happenstance, but it was odd things that only happened when this kid showed up in our lives. Do I believe in the paranormal and all that stuff? Sort of, but as of now, science hasn't been able to explain it, and most everything I've heard or seen can be explained in some way or another. But I do believe there are things out there that seem to defy explanations. I also don't jump immediately to every weird phenomenon as ghosts, monsters, whatever. Nothing paranormal. All of this began in the late 80s on my street in Brooklyn near the Greenwood Cemetery. This isn't a story about that place, but I will say it's a very tranquil setting if you're ever in that area. I used to run for hours through that place as a teenager. We had a whole crew of kids on those streets, and we did everything together, regardless of what schools we went to. Some of us were in private, and some went public. It was a really great neighborhood to grow up in, that's for sure. There was this one kid that was kind of a mystery. His name was Brandon. I'll withhold his last name, if he even exists on paper or in real life somewhere today. And I say all this because we rarely saw Brandon. There were a million questions about him and his family, as none of us ever saw him in the schools we went to, or doing other activities like out of school sports or whatever. Some people say he had some kind of disease or illness that he couldn't be around dust or other contaminants. Some people said he was homeschooled. None of us really knew for sure. One time he did show up at the first day of school at my school, but that was the only time I ever saw him there. He came in, went home, and never came back. We never saw him running around the neighborhoods or playing with us either, but he did always show up at the same time every year, Halloween. And weird shit always seemed to happen when he did find us messing around in the fall. But it was always just 1 or 2 days before Halloween, the actual day of Halloween we would see him, and then poof, he was out of our lives again. We never shunned him and always asked him a zillion questions about where he lived and why he wasn't at our schools and stuff like that. But he would always just say he lived with his grandmother and uncle, and that he had special lessons. That was it. We all did kind of have an inside joke about that, special lessons. Anytime someone was absent for school or couldn't come out and play, we'd say that they were having special lessons. So, overall, Brandon was a nice guy. Quiet, but nice. We'd be playing stickball or whatever right around Halloween, and out of nowhere, he'd show up. Every single time, he kind of just stood on the fringes of our games until someone noticed him and yelled his name to come over with us. And he always did. At first, no one put things together, but looking back, starting around third grade as I now recall, whenever Brandon did come and play with us, someone always got hurt or something strange or bad happened to someone in our families. I know, it sounds weird, but it's true. There were always the normal cuts and bruises and occasional sprains, but every time Brandon played with us, someone got banged up more than normal. In third grade, it was my friend Tanner. We were just throwing a dodgeball around, one of those red kickball kind of balls. We were tossing it around in the street, and Tanner tripped on seemingly nothing. He came down hard and fell on his elbow, breaking his arm. And at the time, it was just an accident, and no one made a big deal out of it. It was simply an accident. Halloween came and went that year, and Brandon once again disappeared. But the next year, something similar happened. We were in the park, and up popped Brandon. After we grilled him about where he'd been, he walked back towards Janie's house that night, and on that same night, her father slipped on the stairs outside of their house and cracked his head badly, as the two kids stood at the bottom of the stoop. Again, no one thought more of it than just an accident. But every year something happened. Brandon would show up around Halloween and some calamity would go down. And every year it got worse. Chris smashed his face open, crashing into a parked car after he said he lost control of his bike for no reason. Another year, Tommy was hit by a falling tree branch in the park when we were sitting around telling ghost stories in the dark before we had to go in. In middle school, when Brandon showed up around Halloween, my best friend Carissa's mom was hit by a car while we were all on the sidewalk talking about trick-or-treating. You get the picture. As we got older, worse stuff started to happen. One year, we were hanging out in front of my friend Tommy's house, and one of those short school buses lost control and smashed into a parked car and pushed it over the curb, and it plowed into our group. A few of us had some bad injuries, me included. In the bang-up, my face got pushed into a fire hydrant and I lost a tooth, and other kids got mangled up too. But never Brandon. We asked our parents about him and if they knew his grandmother, but again, the entire family was a mystery. The whole thing was just odd. We got older and we were doing more things on our own, different sports and extracurricular activities. Brandon would still show up around Halloween, but it was usually just one of us that saw him, and when something weird would happen. Tommy, once again, saw Brandon at a football game, and after Brandon talked to him, a guy broke his back on an odd tackle. My other friend Rachel was in a one-act play in her high school, and Brandon turned up outside of the school after it, and another kid in the play got run over by a heavy cart coming out of the school laden with props. When I was 18 and ready to graduate, things escalated big time. Two of my other friends I'm not going to name were driving home from a homecoming dance and saw Brandon at a gas station where they were filling up and then going on to an after-dance party. One of them said to the other, "Hey, there's Brandon," who was standing in the station parking lot. 2 minutes later, a guy started shooting randomly in the lot and my friend got hit twice. Brandon? Yeah, he disappeared before the cops showed up. So, yeah, pretty effing strange. When I went to college out of state, that was the last I saw of Brandon. But my other friends in the neighborhood still saw him every Halloween, but only at that time of year, just Halloween. Other bad stuff happened every time, until the last time I heard about him. Something happened to Janie again. She had just graduated from nursing school and started a job where she met this really nice guy. They moved into an apartment in Williamsburg together, and things were going really great for both of them. One night, the night before Halloween, Janie was walking home from a market and bumped into Brandon on the street. She didn't recognize him at first, but then realized it was him, and Janie, always the cordial one, said, "Hi, Brandon," and he just said hi back, and they spoke for a minute. Then he went on his way, and when Janie got home, she found her boyfriend dead in their apartment. He'd fallen off a step stool and hit his head on the floor, and died instantly. It was horrible. That was a long time ago, and I still haven't seen Brandon in that time, and no one else I grew up with has either. I always wonder if that was the last bad thing to happen to us, but I don't know. A few of us still talk regularly, and it comes up every year at this time. Will someone see that shy, weird guy that seemed to bring trouble with him whenever we saw him, even if it was just at that time of year? I'm still not big on the supernatural or paranormal stuff, but I don't have any explanation for how or why those things only came to be when that guy was around, and why it only happened around Halloween. I'm married, have 3 grown kids, and a great husband. And though I don't believe in that paranormal stuff, I still hope every year at Halloween it will be another one without Brandon. Okay, whether you have kids or not, this is still a lot of fun to do, and it's really creepy. A bunch of random creepy comments kids have made to their parents. I was tucking in my 2-year-old one night, and he said, "Goodbye, Dad." And I said, "No, we say goodnight." And my son said, "I know, but this time it's goodbye." While I was changing my daughter in front of an open closet, she kept looking around laughing. I asked her what was so funny, and she said, "The man." To which I replied, "What man?" and she pointed at the closet and said the man with the snake neck. When I turned around, nothing was there. I'm afraid to look into the history of the house to see if anyone hung themselves in the closet. I was sitting with my son one night when he said, "I was born here. I had a sister, right? Her and my other mom are so old now. They were okay when the car was on fire, but I sure wasn't." He was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and it was totally out of the blue. We were walking through a graveyard to visit some departed family members, and were walking across the grave of a baby boy who died shortly after being born. There's a family relationship there, so we know for a fact that the mother is still alive. My 4-year-old son turned to my wife and said, "Why is that baby crying? Why won't his mom hug him?" I had a cousin, and when she was 2 years old, she was sleeping in a crib. But her parents kept finding her outside of the crib every morning when they woke up. So my aunt asked her why she was getting out of the crib, and she said, "The old man picks me up and dances with me." So they asked the old lady who they rented the house from about it. And apparently her husband had died in the house. But when he was alive, he used to carry her children around, singing and dancing with them all the time. My dad passed away about 2 weeks before my youngest daughter was born, and when she turned 3, I heard her playing in her bedroom. I went in to see what she was doing, and she said that she was just playing with some old guy, and I thought she was messing around. I had never told her about my dad. So I took her downstairs, and we have a photo album. She pointed to a picture of a man and said, "Daddy, that's the guy." It was my dead father that she had never met. My 5-year-old was having conversations with my father, who died 3 years ago, in my son's bedroom, having them almost every night. I could hear him talking to him, and I would go in and say, "Jason, you know who you're talking to?" And he would just say, "Oh, I was talking to Pop. He was just in here." And the creepiest part about it is that my father had his leg amputated, so my son always tells me, "Yeah, Dad, you should see it. Pop has a new leg now." My brother was about 2 or 3 at the time, and my mom was giving him a bath, and he looked at her and said, "I used to know Grandma way before I knew you." And my mom said, "What do you mean?" And my brother said, "Well, she used to visit me." I guess he was referring to heaven, but then he said, "Well, I didn't even want to come here, but they made me." We had just sold our house and moved into our new place, and my son looked at me and said, "Will the man in the attic come with us when we move?" This wasn't my kid, thankfully, but I babysat a kid as a young teenager. I just put him in bed for the night, and about 10 minutes later he came out and told me, "I can't sleep. My brother won't leave me alone." His brother had died years earlier as a baby. I never babysat for that family again. When my eldest son was almost 2, he would occasionally cry out at night. Sometimes he would be hysterical and he would say, "The mean old lady was scaring him." After this happened several times, I was holding him one night trying to soothe him, and I said, "That old lady better watch out or she'll have me to deal with." My son stopped crying suddenly and leaned back from my shoulder so he could look me dead in the face. He said, "She's not afraid of you, Mommy." That was 23 years ago, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was putting my 2-year-old niece to bed while babysitting one night when she looked over my shoulder and said, "Who's that?" I looked behind me and asked, "Who?" And my niece responded, "The man behind you. He was with you in the kitchen, too." We were the only ones in the house. I spent the rest of the evening in the living room on the chair with its back to the wall, glancing around nervously. When my daughter was 3, she came home from preschool one day, and her demeanor changed the minute we got home. She became very withdrawn and looked upset, and I asked her what was wrong. She said, "The angel on the roof is angry with us." When my brother was 4, he said to my mom, "You should go see Granddad at the hospital because his head hurts from the car crash." My mom told him that Granddad was fine and he didn't even drive. 15 minutes later, the phone rang. It was my nan telling Mom that Granddad was in the hospital after his taxi cab got into a crash. I nannied for a little boy when he was 2 to 4 years old, and he had lots of creepy little stories. The one I remember the most went something like this. Before Mama was my mama, I had a different mama. We went for a walk on the water, and I went through the water and I died. We live in the Pacific Northwest, and he has no concept of being able to walk on frozen water. That one freaked me and his mama out big time. Driving by a cemetery when my kid was about 3 years old, he said aloud, "Who are all the people standing around there?" There was no one standing anywhere in the cemetery that I could see. One time, my son woke me up in the dead of my sleep at 2 a.m. and said, "They are coming," while giving me a very creepy stare. My 5-year-old has talked about his first family for years. He will randomly be doing something that must trigger a memory of them, and he's always been consistent in his story. He says that one day he got sick and then came to live with us. He talks less about them the older he gets, but it's always fascinating to me when he brings them up. The day my grandmother went into a coma, my youngest sister, who was 4 at the time and completely unaware that our grandma was in the hospital, got home from school and said Grandma came to school with her. For the next 2 weeks, she said that every day my grandmother would visit her at school for varying amounts of time, and she would always walk out the door. One Wednesday, my sister came home from school upset and told my mother that Grandma had stood up and then disappeared completely. A few hours later, my mother got the call that my grandmother had, in fact, passed away. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you haven't, please like this video, maybe even subscribe to the channel, and of course follow me on social media. Links to that are in the description below. If you have an extra second, leave a comment down below. I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. If you'd like to take your support of the channel a step further, find a link to my Patreon page, or of course, consider purchasing some Campfire Crew and Uncle Josh merchandise. In the description is a link to my TeePublic storefront. Everyone, happy Halloween. Enjoy it. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.